Hello friends, for today's video I thought it'd be fun to just chit chat and go through the Goodreads Choice Award winners with all of you. I haven't yet looked. I managed to have some restraint and not take a peek at all today, although I find a lot of us are not particularly surprised at which ones end up winning if we're relatively familiar with the authors that are popular from various different categories. I'm primarily going to be looking at fantasy leaning categories today, although I might pop into some of the other genres just to see what won. But I do find that what ends up not being first place, but what comes in the places after that, that's where I find more of the interesting voting happens. And also it just helps remind me that while I think a lot of us have a view of what's popular within our own niches, the Goodreads Choice Award nominees serves as a reminder that no given genre only exists in a niche. It actually can be a lot further reaching than we expect. And so obviously in our case, BookTube has its own various different books that become popular. As an example, The Tainted Cup, I think is one that has kind of taken people by surprise. A lot of people really liked that one. But do I think that that's going to compete on the level that a fantasy book of the month pick might have reached? I don't think so, but it could be kind of cool if it did. And then at the same time, I find a lot of the book of the month picks aren't quite the same as the ones that get popular here on BookTube, and so if those end up having more votes, I do think it's just kind of interesting to remind myself that there are a lot of people that enjoy fantasy and love fantasy. But without yammering on for any longer, we'll go ahead and jump into it. And also a reminder, I don't know why I said it like that, not a reminder, a thing that I have said frequently in a lot of videos as of late, but just letting you know again, my dog is right by me once again. I think she misses my husband because he is, this month's just a little busier than normal as far as traveling and such things because there was some sad news, family stuff that we won't get into, but my husband is not home. He is visiting some other family members at the moment, and I think Luna's feeling his absence. So, although she's around me a lot, as is, and I don't know if you heard her grumble or sigh loudly, but anywho, okay. Jumping into it. Winner, Somewhere Beyond the Sea. Okay, never mind. I thought for sure it was going to be the Leigh Bardugo book, which was really close. Wow, okay, so the votes between the two of them, Somewhere Beyond the Sea was 69,854. The Familiar by Leigh Bardugo was 68,564. I'm surprised, but also that does make sense because House in the Cerulean Sea, it did very well the year it came out. If you are interested, if you're new, I've covered a few different topics involving Goodreads recently, and one of them happened to be where I was looking back at various different years of Goodreads nominees and the top 10 from those years. So I do kind of have some of this fresh in my head, and I know House in the Cerulean Sea was very high the year it came out, and then Under the Whispering Door also ended up being very high, despite the fact that I think a lot of people who reviewed it, or at least I should say the reviews I saw, were not necessarily glowing. I did read both of those. I understand the hype for House of the Cerulean Sea, though it didn't necessarily fit my taste, specifically with cozy fantasy, as much as other ones have, though I do think it was sort of a catalyst for cozy fantasy becoming a lot more popular than it had been in the past. But Under the Whispering Door, I didn't particularly care for, and I always was unsure if it was because I actually just don't love the "this is what happens after you die" trope, I guess you call it. It's not really a trope, it's more of just a plot that you can have within stories. I don't know why I hate it. I actually recently DNF'd a book that I really wanted to give a try because I thought maybe it might break my dislike of that type of story, and it didn't, and I DNF'd it pretty quickly, but that's irrelevant. Point is, I was always unsure if Under the Whispering Door was really as loved or not, because I didn't necessarily care for it. It felt like other people I knew didn't love it, especially as much as House in the Cerulean Sea, and then it seemed like it still ranked really high. So it came across a little bit like, and this is just, I think a lot of us on repeat, it was popular. We talk about Goodreads Choice Award nominees are often name recognition and popularity contests, and thus I kind of feel like maybe that counted, but I also don't want to take away from anybody who has been very impacted by these works. I didn't realize this would turn into a whole thing about TJ Klune's works, but point is, I'm surprised that this is number one. I don't find that sequels, unless they're written by Sarah J. Maas, tend to be the winners of the Goodreads Choice Award nominees. So I guess that's exciting for people that are fans of that series. The Familiar, I still need to read, so I can't really give comments as to whether I personally think that it deserves the hype or not. And if I ever, again, if you're new and don't know, if I talk about if I think something deserves the hype or not, that's just based off of subjective, usually rooted in whether I enjoyed it or if I didn't enjoy it as much, and it's not me trying to state whether I think objectively it deserves accolades. But I haven't read The Familiar, I can't really comment on it too much. Emily Wilde's Map of the Otherlands, another sequel. This one's not too surprising to me in that Map of the Otherlands, I think, is leaning very much on a lot of different lines, where it is fantasy and it's pulling from Fae-inspired fantasy, which a lot of people really like. It has pieces of historical fantasy within it. It has these little tidbits that feel very academic, given our main character is creating in the first book an encyclopedia. In the second book, she is continuing her studies by trying to make a map of the Otherlands, as the title would imply, or just reveal to you. Also, it does lean a little bit toward, I would say, fantasy romance, probably a little bit more than a little bit into fantasy romance. So it's bringing in readers there. It is very accessible, as even though there are a lot of folklore elements and there's a lot of different kinds of fae that are being categorized, I don't think the world building at any point feels overwhelming or daunting, and thus it makes it a lot easier if somebody is maybe newer to the genre, or maybe they just generally like their fantasy to not be these giant epic worlds. They like it to be a little bit more on the low to high fantasy, but not maybe as epic in scope. So I think there's a lot of appeal to this story. I do enjoy this series. I think it's a lot of fun. I like the writing. And also, because they actually had an audiobook category this year, I will say I personally like the narration quite a bit. I think it really captures the voice. It being in third place, to sum up, not the biggest surprise. The Book of Doors, I need to look into this one more. I don't know much about this one. Empire of the Damned, another sequel that ranked pretty high. I've not read this series, but I am always a little surprised at the popularity, as I feel like BookTube over the years has had sort of a love-hate relationship with this author's works, because the Nevernight series, I feel like people were so in love with it, and then they didn't like the ending. There was a lot of people that didn't really care for this first installment of the series, but then the people who love it really love it. And I can't tell if my view of the popularity of this is clouded by just kind of the history of the way BookTube has reacted to a lot of this author's works, but I have not read either of the books in this particular series. 5 Broken Blades, this one's not surprising to me because from everything I can tell, it's actually fantasy romance, and I see it in stores all the time. I would see it at Target at the front all the time by where you go to pay. And obviously, anytime you have a book that's more so in areas where people are more likely to see it, that tends to signal, okay, this is going to probably be a little bit more popular. I believe it was a Book of the Month pick. That tends to give things a boost. So this doesn't surprise me whatsoever. And speaking of Book of the Month, the next 2 are both Book of the Month picks. The Foxwife, I really want to pick this one up. I haven't read it yet, but I have wanted to since it came out. It sounds really interesting. The Lost Story, this one to me has elements to it that actually remind me of TJ Klune's writing, and it didn't end up working for me, but there were pieces of this that I really appreciated. I thought the thematic elements were really moving and pretty gutting, actually, but the contrast between that and the almost like cotton candy sweetness of some of the characters, to me, that clash, I should say, I feel like it did clash a little bit, as opposed to having there be moments of levity against those harder moments to get through. So the balance didn't quite work for my tastes, but I can see why a lot of people would really resonate with The Lost Story. The Tainted Cup, that's exciting to see that one up higher, so yay The Tainted Cup. The Blackbird Oracle, All Souls 5. It's pretty impressive that this book has 5, or I should say the series has 5 books, and that 5th book is ranked so high. I've not read any of the books in this series. I do want to at some point, but as of right now, I can't comment on the book itself, but I know of the series. It's been around for a while. There's an adaptation, I believe, as well. I'm almost positive there is, but I'll leave some room for error there. But yeah, this doesn't surprise me necessarily. An Academy for Liars. This one I had on my radar from anticipated releases because I do check in every month to see what's going to be coming out in the upcoming month. And this one I thought sounded interesting. It also sounded like something that would have a lot of appeal because it seems to have somewhat of a dark academia setting. And I think maybe that assessment is correct. I've avoided looking at too much about it because I do want to check it out, but I don't want to really be spoiled or have certain expectations placed on it as a result of what I hear other people saying. I want to go into it fresh. But I was pretty sure just based off the synopsis it was popular, or that it would appeal to a lot of people, and it looks like it has. A Sorceress Comes to Call. I wish this one ranked higher. I think this is my first one where I'm just like, aw man. To me, A Sorceress Comes to Call was a fantastic blend of grim fairy tale and thriller almost, and horror story, so I thought that it executed those things very well. I think it's one of my favorite T. Kingfisher books I've picked up. So I'm a little bummed that it's not higher. A Song to Drown Rivers. I have read this one as well. For any of them that I've read that I've done any kind of review for, I'll have that linked in case you'd like to see more in-depth thoughts. But Song to Drown Rivers, I just didn't really think that this one felt like it was placed in the right category. To me, I think this would have been better placed in, fantasy, which is the one it's in. I thought it would have been better placed within fiction, personally. So I almost kind of feel like it wasn't in the right category, but it did pretty well for itself. The Warm Hands of Ghosts. I didn't love this one, but also it had a lot of aspects to it that I could see being exceptionally moving to a lot of people. Similar to what I said about A Song to Drown Rivers, I actually think that this one would be better placed within historical fiction, as it is more speculative in my mind than fantasy. Obviously, there's overlap, but I just felt like maybe it would have been better placed within historical fiction. However, because this author has, I think, a history of writing within fantasy, and there are elements to this that are not completely rooted in reality, I understand why it's in fantasy. I just think the placement's a little funny. When Among Crows, it's Veronica Roth, but I haven't picked this one up, so I can't really comment. I have also not picked up The Night Ends with Fire. The Bright Sword, I have picked up. I would have thought this would have ranked higher, not because I thought it was absolutely the most amazing thing I'd ever read, but because of who the author is. I thought that name recognition would have had it higher. So this one has surprised me a little bit. Voyage of the Damned, I was just surprised this one was on the list. Similar to a couple of the other ones where I'd seen their covers here and there, but I don't know a whole lot about them. This one was on an anticipated releases for me, but then I just didn't really get the chance to pick it up, and I think the Goodreads awards have been kind of like a reminder that this exists for me, so that one is third from the bottom. Then The Dead Cattail Assassins. This one was, I feel like it was difficult to have this in the same category as the rest of these because, if I'm not mistaken, this is a novella, and the rest are full-length novels or parts of series. As we've seen, we've had multiple that are second books in series, a fifth book in a series. And then last, A Sweet Sting of Salt. I haven't really heard much about it, so this one surprised me, and I feel bad saying this, but now it doesn't surprise me to see it at the bottom because it surprised me initially to even see it on the list at all. But maybe I'll have to look into it further. Okay, that was the fantasy category. That was the one that I was the most curious about. We'll go ahead and switch to, let's do young adult fantasy next. And the winner, Ruthless Vows. That was my prediction because Divine Rivals won last year. And Ruthless Vows was, it's only duology, and it came out in the same year as Divine Rivals, which I think helps a lot. But it still came out within, obviously, the criteria timeline for this year's nominees, so that's not surprising that it won. I do want a really quick look. So the winner for Young Adult had 93,230 votes. I want to compare that to Fantasy, 69,854. So that is kind of surprising to me that there were so many more people that voted within the Young Adult Fantasy than there were within the Adult Fantasy, so that's interesting. Looking at these, this is going to go by much quicker because I probably won't have as much commentary, nor will I have probably read as many within the young adult category. The second place one, though, was Reckless. This is the sequel to Powerless. I haven't read this, but I have seen so many people pick this one up, so this doesn't surprise me at all. Heartless Hunter / The Crimson Moth, depending on where you live, I think it's called one of the two of those names, was third place. That also doesn't surprise me because I've seen it all over. The Prisoner's Throne, it's a Holly Black book. Almost always her books rank really high, except for Book of Night. But anyway, so The Prisoner's Throne, not surprising. Defiant, I actually am impressed that Defiant is so high up because it's the fourth in a series, but I still haven't read Defiant. I need to pick this one up. I meant to pick it up at the beginning of the year, but I wanted to get through all of Skyward Flight, which would be the novellas. There's a collection of them, and I wanted to make sure I read one that is recommended to read before you pick up Defiant, which I did, and then I haven't picked up Defiant, so I'll get to that one eventually. Don't Let the Forest In. I don't know much about this one, so exciting to see it ranked pretty high. Where the Library Hides, it's a sequel to What the River Knows. This one actually surprised me a little bit because I don't know that I realized that What the River Knows was so popular, and thus I wouldn't have expected its sequel to be. I actually thought the next one would rank higher, Wisteria, because Belladonna was quite popular when it first came out, so I thought that the series would be up further. Then Air by Saba Tahir. This book just came out, and I think that's probably a big reason why, because people just haven't probably had the time to pick it up. Doesn't always stop things from being ranked pretty high, but this one did only just recently come out. All This Twisted Glory, haven't read any of the Woven Kingdom books, so I can't comment on that too much. The next chunk of them I am not particularly familiar with, so I'm going to go ahead and skip them, but I'll put them on the screen so that you can see if you haven't checked it out for yourself just yet. The next one I have read, though, would be Dragon Fruit, which I really enjoyed Dragon Fruit, so it's exciting to see that there. This is one that was a Book of the Month pick that has not ranked super high, so that's a little surprising. The Darkness Within Us, I would have thought this would have ranked higher, but I think it coming out so much later than The Shadows Between Us might partially have contributed to why it's lower. Of Jade and Dragons, I wouldn't have minded up higher. I really like the setting of this one. The more I think on it, the more I'm like, I quite liked that book. I thought it was a lot of fun, and I do plan to pick up the sequel when it comes out. For She Is Wrath, and then Your Blood, My Bones, which are both two that I haven't read, so I can't comment too much on those. But I would say that the young adult category didn't surprise me too much. Really quick, I just want to pop into horror. Stephen King had a book come out, so it's not surprising that he won. But What Feasts at Night, that's the one I wanted to see where it ranked, and it ranked in third place. That's pretty exciting. I personally, though, liked A Sorceress Comes to Call by T. Kingfisher more than this particular book, so I think I would have rather A Sorceress Comes to Call been higher within fantasy. And then I can't really say if I think What Feasts at Night should have been lower because I'm not really in tune with the horror genre, but yay for T. Kingfisher, you know. Although there's a part of me that's like, I feel like that attitude is what leads to certain books winning because of name recognition instead of actually knowing from having read a bunch of the entries. But I like T. Kingfisher. I just want, I'm excited for more success in general because it's still not on the levels of the Stephen Kings and the Sarah J. Maas's of the genres that she writes in. Anyway, let's look at romantasy, shall we? Oh, wow. House of Flame and Shadow won. Who would have ever thunk it? Apprentice to the Villain was second. Quicksilver was the next one. When the Moon Hatched. Okay, I was not surprised to find this one in the fourth place spot. I had a feeling because I see it blowing up. Didn't work for me. It has worked for a lot of people. The Spell Shop. That makes me happy. I don't really feel like the Spell Shop should be in romantasy, though. I think it leans more into just fantasy than it does romantasy. But I'm happy that it ranked quite high. And similar to what I was saying about T. Kingfisher and just being excited that I think that their careers are growing and growing. I feel that way about Sarah Beth Durst as well. I have read now 5 books by Sarah Beth Durst, and I've enjoyed them all, so I'm really excited to see that. I think there's a little bit more hype that is starting to be generated for this author. A Fate Inked in Blood, that's not too surprising. Danielle Jensen's been in the romantasy scene for a while, and A Fate Inked in Blood, I think, was the first adult fantasy romance that was traditionally published, if I'm not mistaken, because The Bridge Kingdom has started as self-published, and it is going to be traditionally published here. I think there are already paperback copies that are out now that are traditionally published, but I think maybe different editions are going to be coming out in the future in general. But anyway, this doesn't surprise me. There's a few after that I can't really comment on. The Honey Witch, I'm kind of surprised this one is up so high, because I didn't find that it necessarily appealed to after I read it, I was kind of curious what other people thought, and it didn't seem like all that many people loved this one. So I'm kind of surprised by its placement. I've not read really any of the others within fantasy romance, so I'll go ahead and cut it off there. And as far as the rest of the genres from the nominees, these are outside of what I typically read, so I'm not going to be going through those either. I just wanted to primarily look at the fantasy or fantasy adjacent genres and look at the results. But I would love to know what really surprised you from this year, and then what was not surprising whatsoever. What are some books that you think were completely snubbed, or what are some books that you think are very deserving of the hype? If you're interested in chatting more about Goodreads, I'll link some other relevant videos in the description bar down below. Thanks so much for watching though. I hope you have a great rest of your day, and I'll see you later. Bye.